I never imagined that my father's 70th birthday celebration at the renowned Oak Ridge Country Club would end with my brother casually suggesting I step aside during the family photos while everyone pretended not to notice. Even less could I have anticipated the look of utter shock on my siblings' faces 2 hours later when the club manager interrupted dessert to announce the dedication of the newly renovated East Wing, now bearing my name. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But that moment, the crystal clear realization that shattered years of being overlooked and undervalued, became the catalyst that not only restored my place in the family, but transformed me from the forgotten middle child into the woman who would revolutionize our family's multi-generational business. Olivia, maybe just this once, we'll do immediate family first, my older brother Nathan said with practiced casualness as the photographer arranged us on the country club's grand staircase. His wife Melissa nodded encouragingly beside him, while my younger sister Abigail pretended to be absorbed in fixing her perfectly styled hair. 6 pairs of eyes deliberately avoided meeting mine. My father Robert, his new wife Diane, 20 years his junior and perpetually uncomfortable around me, Nathan, Melissa, Abigail, and her husband Tyler. All members of what they'd subtly redefined as the immediate family over the last few years since Dad had remarried. We can do some with extended family afterward, Nathan continued, his voice carrying that familiar tone of feigned reasonableness that had become his specialty when managing my presence at family functions. I stood frozen on the periphery in my carefully selected navy dress, the one I'd spent weeks choosing specifically to complement the family photo aesthetic without drawing too much attention. This wasn't the first slight, far from it, but something about the casual cruelty of this public exclusion cracked something open inside me. Extended family? I repeated quietly, my fingers involuntarily touching the thin gold locket at my throat, my mother's most cherished possession. I'm Dad's daughter, Nathan. Same as Abigail. A heavy silence fell over the grand staircase. The photographer glanced awkwardly between us, clearly sensing the tension but uncertain how to proceed. The other guests milling around the reception area had fallen conspicuously quiet, creating that horrible bubble of public discomfort that I'd spent most of my life trying to avoid. Nathan shifted his weight, that telltale sign of irritation I'd learned to recognize from childhood. Don't make this difficult, Liv. You know what I mean. We just want a quick shot with Dad, Diane, and the core family unit before we do the bigger groupings. The core family unit, a phrase that had emerged mysteriously after Dad's remarriage 3 years ago, gradually redefining family boundaries. To exclude the complicated middle child who too closely resembled her deceased mother, the daughter whose presence seemed to make Diane uncomfortable, simply by existing as a reminder of a previous life. The careful conditioning of 5 years had nearly had me stepping back before I fully processed what was happening. The family. Dynamics had been shifting subtly since Mom's death, with my more assertive siblings gradually claiming larger pieces of Dad's attention, business interests, and now, apparently, his actual family identity. My career at Hamilton Enterprises, the architectural firm our grandfather had founded, and which I'd helped expand into sustainable design. Olivia's work is more of a specialty division rather than central to the company vision, Nathan had explained to investors last year. My home in the historic district that Mom had loved so much. It's a bit bohemian for Hamilton family representation, Abigail had remarked when client meetings were being scheduled. Even my relationship with Dad. He's got so much on his plate with the business transition and his new life with Diane. Let's not burden him with unnecessary complications, had become the standard response when I raised concerns about company decisions from which I'd been excluded. But being physically removed from the family photos at Dad's milestone birthday felt different. It wasn't a subtle redirection or a casual dismissal of my professional contributions. It was a public declaration of my outsider status within my own family. The locket at my throat suddenly felt warm against my skin. Inside was a small family photo: Mom, Dad, Nathan, me, and Abigail, taken at the lake house the summer before Mom's diagnosis. Before everything changed. "I'm not extended family, Nathan," I said, my voice steadier than expected. "I'm Dad's daughter, a Hamilton by birth and by profession. I belong in the family photos." Dad finally looked up from his conversation with Diane, seeming to tune into the tension for the first time. "What's the holdup? The guests are waiting for us to cut the cake." Before Nathan could frame the situation to his advantage, I addressed my father directly. "Dad, Nathan thinks I should step out of the immediate family photos. I was hoping you might clarify whether that's what you want as well." Robert Hamilton, the imposing figure who had built a regional architectural firm into a national powerhouse, looked momentarily caught off guard. In that brief, unguarded moment, I saw his eyes flick toward Diane, then Nathan, before settling back on me with an expression of discomfort rather than conviction. "Olivia, honey, we're just trying to be efficient with the photographer's time," he said, avoiding the actual question with the diplomatic skill that had made him legendary in business negotiations. "We'll do lots of different combinations." In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity the pattern that had been developing since my mother's death 6 years ago. My family wasn't just reorganizing around Dad's new marriage. They were systematically excluding the one person who most reminded them of what they'd lost, and perhaps more concerningly, the one person who consistently questioned the direction Nathan was taking Hamilton Enterprises. I thought about the Hamilton headquarters downtown, where my sustainable design initiatives had been relocated from the prominent third floor to a more appropriate space in the basement. I recalled the family lake house that had mysteriously been sold without my knowledge, justified as streamlining family assets. I remembered my gradual removal from client presentations despite bringing in 3 of our 5 largest accounts last year. Most painfully, I recognized how I had participated in my own erasure, compromising to keep peace, adapting to maintain relationships, interpreting exclusion as simply the natural consequence of Dad's new life chapter. The locket at my throat seemed to pulse with a memory of my mother's voice. "Stand your ground with grace, Olivia. That's the Hamilton way. The real Hamilton way." "I see," I said quietly, taking a deliberate step back. Every cell in my body wanted to protest further, to make a scene that would force acknowledgement. But some deeper wisdom held me back. This moment of public exclusion wasn't the real problem. It was merely a symptom of a much larger pattern that wouldn't be solved with a forced photo opportunity. "We can discuss this later," I added, turning away before anyone could see the tears threatening to form. "You're right, Dad. The guests are waiting." As I walked away from the staircase, I heard the photographer begin directing the immediate family into position. The murmurs of the gathered guests parted around me like water, their discomfort at witnessing family discord creating a palpable bubble of space. I made my way to the bar, ordering a sparkling water while I gathered my composure. From this vantage point, I could see through the grand windows to the east wing of the country club, the section that had been under renovation for the past 8 months. A project that, though no one in my family knew, I had been integrally involved with. Martin Chen, the club manager and my friend since college, approached with concern evident in his expression. "Olivia, is everything all right? The dedication ceremony is in 30 minutes. I took a steadying breath, touching the locket for strength. "It's fine, Martin. Family dynamics, that's all. The ceremony is still on." He nodded, though his eyes reflected skepticism. "Your father seemed surprised when I mentioned your role in the renovation. He didn't know?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. No, I admitted. None of them do. The truth was complicated. After Mom died, I'd channeled my grief into something constructive, secretly working with the Oak Ridge Board to design and oversee the renovation of the deteriorating East Wing, once the heart of the club, but neglected for decades. I'd done it pro bono, asking only that they establish a scholarship program for young women interested in architectural preservation. I hadn't told my family, partly because Nathan had made it clear that pet projects were distractions from the company's main objectives, and partly because I'd needed something that was mine alone after years of having my contributions minimized. What I hadn't anticipated was the board's decision to name the wing after me in recognition of work that had saved them millions while preserving the historical integrity of the space. When Martin had called last month to tell me of their plans, to announce it at an upcoming event, I'd been shocked, and then realized the timing aligned perfectly with Dad's birthday celebration that the club was hosting. Now, watching my family laugh and pose on the staircase without me, I felt a strange calm replace my initial hurt. The public exclusion from photos seemed almost trivial compared to the revelation that was coming. Not because I craved recognition, but because it would force them to see me, truly see me, for perhaps the first time in years. The Hamilton. East Wing, Martin said, following my gaze to the newly renovated space. Your vision brought it back to life, Olivia. The board members can't stop talking about how you balanced modern sustainability with historical preservation. They're saying it's going to be featured in Architectural Digest next month. I smiled, a genuine expression that felt foreign after the tension of the photo session. That's gratifying to hear, though I suspect my family might have some interesting reactions to the announcement. They really don't know, Martin asked again, his surprise evident. But you're a partner at Hamilton Enterprises, aren't you? Wouldn't a project of this scale typically go through the firm? The question hit a nerve. I am technically a partner, I confirmed, but my role has been reinterpreted in recent years. Nathan prefers to focus on commercial high-rises and office complexes. He considers historical preservation to be, how did he put it, nostalgically unprofitable. Understanding dawned in Martin's eyes. So you did this independently despite being part of the family firm? That must have been difficult. Less difficult than trying to push it through company channels, I admitted. Sometimes the path of least resistance isn't about giving in. It's about finding your own way forward. The photographer was now directing extended family members to join the group on the stairs. Several cousins looked around, presumably for me, before awkwardly taking their places. I noticed my father glancing around the room as well, perhaps finally registering my absence, though not enough to pause the proceedings. We should head toward the East Wing, Martin said, checking his watch. The board members are gathering for the dedication, and as the guest of honor, you should be there early. Guest of honor? The phrase struck me as ironically fitting. Honored. By strangers for work my own family didn't even know I'd done. Work that, had they known, would likely have been dismissed as another of Olivia's impractical passion projects. As I followed Martin through the club's central corridor, I caught sight of the newly installed plaque beside the East Wing entrance, still covered by a velvet cloth for the upcoming reveal. My name was hidden beneath, waiting to be acknowledged, in a way my family had consistently failed to do. I touched my mother's locket again, drawing strength from her memory. Mom had been the visionary at Hamilton Enterprises before her illness, the one who had pushed Dad to expand beyond commercial projects into more meaningful community spaces. She had taught me that architecture wasn't just about buildings. It was about creating environments that honored both history and future. Your mother would be incredibly proud, Martin said quietly, noticing my gesture. She always said you had the truest Hamilton eye, able to see both what is and what could be. The tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over. Thank you for saying that, I whispered. Sometimes I think I'm the only one who remembers who she really was, and what the Hamilton name was supposed to stand for. The dedication ceremony, was scheduled for the middle of the evening celebrations, immediately following the dinner but before the cake cutting. As guests finished their main courses, I sat at my assigned table, notably distant from the main family table where Dad, Diane, Nathan, Melissa, Abigail, and Tyler were engaged in animated conversation, perfectly framed by the photographer who circulated capturing candid moments. None of them had approached me since the photo incident, their practiced strategy of allowing tensions to blow over rather than addressing conflicts directly. It was a family pattern I knew well: avoid, dismiss, reframe, and eventually act as though nothing had happened. By tomorrow, Nathan would likely call with some offhand comment about me being overly sensitive and suggest we move forward without further discussion. But something had fundamentally shifted inside me. The pattern was visible now in a way it hadn't been before. Like an architectural blueprint suddenly illuminated, I could see the structural flaws in our family dynamic with perfect clarity. Martin approached the small stage set up near the entrance to the East Wing, tapping the microphone to gain everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and members of the Oak Ridge Country Club, may I have your attention, please?" The room gradually quieted, with my father's table being the last to notice the interruption to their conversation. I saw Dad turn with a slightly annoyed expression that quickly shifted to his public-facing smile when he realized all eyes were on the stage. "As many of you know," Martin continued, "Oak Ridge Country Club has been a cornerstone of our community for over 70 years. The East Wing, which originally housed the club's library, art collection, and community meeting rooms, has been in desperate need of renovation for the past decade." I noticed Nathan checking his watch impatiently. Architectural preservation had never interested him, despite our family's long history in the field. His vision for Hamilton Enterprises focused exclusively on modern commercial properties with maximum profit margins, a dramatic departure from the balanced approach our grandfather had established and our mother had maintained. "What many of you don't know," Martin said, his voice taking on a note of pride, "is that 8 months ago, a remarkable architect approached our board with a vision to restore the East Wing in a way that honored its historical significance while incorporating state-of-the-art sustainability features that would reduce the club's energy consumption by nearly 40%. I saw my father straighten in his chair, his business instincts clearly engaged by the mention of significant energy savings. Sustainability metrics were becoming increasingly important to clients, something I had been telling Nathan for years, while he dismissed environmental concerns as trendy but peripheral. "This architect," Martin continued, "worked tirelessly without compensation, bringing in specialized preservation experts at her own expense, sourcing historically accurate materials, and personally overseeing every aspect of the renovation. The results have exceeded our wildest expectations, both aesthetically and functionally." I could feel curious glances turning my way from neighboring tables. A few club members who had been involved with the board were smiling knowingly in my direction. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my water glass, the enormity of the moment suddenly hitting me. This wasn't just about recognition. It was about reclaiming my professional identity and my family legacy on my own terms. The board unanimously voted to name the newly restored space in honor of the visionary architect who made it possible, Martin announced, moving toward the covered plaque. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to unveil the Hamilton East Wing, named for Olivia Hamilton, whose brilliant work has preserved a vital piece of our community's history while moving it confidently into the future." The sound that followed was like a physical wave, the collective intake of breath from the guests, followed by enthusiastic applause that seemed to swell from every corner of the room except the main family table, where a tableau of shock had frozen my relatives in place. Dad's mouth had literally fallen open, his carefully maintained composure completely shattered. Diane looked confused, glancing between him and my siblings as if waiting for a cue on how to react. Nathan's face had flushed deep red, while Abigail had gone pale, her hand gripping Tyler's arm with visible tension. Martin gestured for me to join him on the stage. As I rose from my seat, I felt a strange lightness despite the weight of every eye in the room. The walk to the stage seemed both endless and instantaneous, time stretching and compressing in that peculiar way it does during pivotal life moments. "Olivia Hamilton," Martin announced as I reached him. "Would you do us the honor of saying a few words about your remarkable contribution to Oak Ridge?" The microphone felt cool in my hand as I turned to face the gathered guests. In the front row, the board members were smiling encouragingly. Scattered throughout the room were faces displaying various degrees of surprise, admiration, and curiosity. And at the center table, my family remained frozen in an almost comical tableau of disbelief. "Thank you, Martin, and thank you to the Oak Ridge Board for this tremendous honor," I began, my voice steadier than anticipated. Architecture has always been about more than buildings to me. It's about creating spaces that honor our past while embracing our future, spaces where memories are preserved and new ones can flourish. I touched my mother's locket, drawing strength from her memory. My grandfather founded Hamilton Enterprises on the principle that good design serves community needs while respecting historical context. My mother expanded that vision to include environmental stewardship alongside aesthetic integrity. These values formed the foundation of my approach to the East Wing renovation. Dad's expression shifted slightly at the mention of Mom, a flicker of something, recognition, perhaps, or remembrance, crossing his features before disappearing behind his practiced neutral expression. The East Wing presented unique challenges, I continued, warming to my subject. The original 1940s structure had significant historical value, but decades of neglect had compromised its structural integrity. Rather than demolish and rebuild, which would have been easier but would have erased an important piece of our community's heritage, we chose the more difficult path of authentic restoration combined with invisible modern innovations. As I described the specific technical challenges and solutions, I noticed several prominent architects in the audience nodding with professional appreciation. Among them was Caroline Winters, the founder of the region's most prestigious architectural journal and a woman whose approval Nathan had been courting unsuccessfully for years. The Hamilton East Wing stands as testament to what's possible when we refuse to accept false choices between preservation and progress, I concluded, making deliberate eye contact with my father. We don't have to destroy our foundations to build our future. The strongest structures honor what came before while creating space for what comes next. The applause that followed was gratifying, but what caught my attention was Caroline Winters rising to her feet, initiating a standing ovation that quickly spread throughout the room. Even Dad stood, though his expression remained complicated, a mixture of pride, confusion, and something that looked almost like regret. Martin returned to the microphone as I stepped back. "The board would like to present Olivia with this small token of our appreciation," he said, accepting a wooden box from one of the board members. "This key is symbolic, of course, but it represents our gratitude for unlocking the potential of a space many thought beyond saving." As he handed me the ornate brass key, my mind flashed back to a conversation with Nathan 6 months ago, when he'd dismissed my concerns about the direction of Hamilton Enterprises. "Not everything can be saved, Liv. Some things need to be cleared away to make room for progress. That's just business reality." The irony wasn't lost on me. While being systematically sidelined at my own family's firm, I'd successfully completed a major preservation project that was now being celebrated by the very architectural elite Nathan had been trying to impress. After the ceremony, guests were invited to tour the newly renovated wing. As I stood near the entrance greeting visitors and explaining design elements, I was approached by Caroline Winters, her characteristic silver bob and piercing gaze immediately recognizable. "Miss Hamilton," she said, extending her hand. I've been following your sustainable design work for several years, but this renovation exceeds even my expectations. The seamless integration of historical elements with cutting-edge environmental systems is remarkable. Thank you, Ms. Winters, I replied, genuinely touched by praise from someone I'd admired throughout my career. That means a great deal coming from you. She glanced around to ensure we weren't being overheard before continuing in a lower voice. I've been trying to feature Hamilton Enterprises in Architectural Quarterly for years, but your brother has consistently pushed commercial projects that frankly lack distinction. This, however, she gestured to the space around us, this is worthy of our cover story. Would you be interested in discussing it further? Before I could respond, I felt a presence beside me and turned to find my father standing there, his expression unreadable. Dad, I said, suddenly feeling like a child again despite the professional triumph of the evening. I'd like to introduce Caroline Winters, Editor-in-Chief of Architectural Quarterly. Ms. Winters, my father, Robert Hamilton. Mr. Hamilton, Caroline acknowledged with cool professionalism. Your daughter has created something extraordinary. Here. You must be very proud. Dad cleared his throat, his discomfort evident. Yes, quite extraordinary. I was just hoping to have a word with Olivia privately, if you wouldn't mind. Of course, Caroline replied, handing me her business card. Call my office on Monday, Ms. Hamilton. I'm serious about that cover story. As she walked away, Dad and I stood in awkward silence, the celebration continuing around us. It was he who finally broke the tension. Why didn't you tell me about this project, Olivia? He asked, his voice lacking its usual authoritative edge. The question struck me as so fundamentally missing the point that I nearly laughed. After years of being systematically excluded from meaningful work at Hamilton Enterprises, after being literally pushed out of family photos hours earlier, his concern was that I hadn't informed him of my independent success. Would it have mattered if I had? I asked quietly, not wanting to create a scene but unwilling to retreat into our family's pattern of artificial harmony. His brow furrowed. Of course it would have mattered. Hamilton Enterprises could have what, Dad? I interrupted gently. Taken over the project? Assigned it to another team? Explained why historical preservation doesn't fit the company's current direction? Or perhaps just patted me on the head and suggested I focus on something more commercially viable? The direct challenge was so out of character for the accommodating middle child that Dad actually took a step back, reassessing me as if seeing a stranger. That's not fair, Olivia. We've always supported your interests, but Nathan has a clear vision for the company's growth. That conveniently excludes everything Mom valued about architecture, I finished. Everything Grandfather built the firm to represent. The mention of Mom seemed to hit him physically. Dad's shoulders sagged slightly, and for a moment, I glimpsed the grief he usually kept carefully contained. Your mother had unique perspectives that were ahead of their time, he acknowledged. But markets change, and businesses must adapt. Is that what's happened to our family too, Dad? Have we adapted to the point where I'm now considered extended family rather than your daughter? The question was pointed but delivered without heat, a genuine inquiry rather than an accusation. He had the grace to look ashamed. That photo situation was unfortunate. Nathan didn't do anything you haven't enabled for years, I said, surprised by my own clarity and calm. What happened today didn't occur in isolation. It's part of a pattern that began after Mom died and accelerated when you remarried. I understand change is necessary, Dad, but erasing me from the family and the company isn't adaptation, it's elimination. Before he could respond, Nathan appeared at his elbow, his professional smile firmly in place though his eyes betrayed his agitation. There you are. People are asking for the birthday boy. The cake is ready. He barely acknowledged my presence. We should get back to the main room. Dad hesitated, and in that momentary pause, I saw him wrestling with competing impulses, the desire to continue our conversation versus the habit of following Nathan's direction. Ultimately, habit won. "We'll talk more later, Olivia," he said, allowing himself to be led away. I watched them go, feeling neither victory nor defeat, but something more complex, the simultaneous grief of recognizing a pattern for what it truly was and the liberation of no longer being bound by it. Martin approached as they disappeared into the crowd. "Everything okay?" "Not really," I admitted, "but I think that might actually be progress." He smiled knowingly. "The board chairman wants to introduce you to some people who might be interested in similar restoration work for the downtown library. Shall I tell him you're available?" I touched my mother's locket, feeling its familiar contours, the tangible connection to a legacy I had been fighting to preserve while my family raced to redefine it. "Yes," I decided, "I'm definitely available." As I followed Martin toward a group of community leaders gathered near the original fireplace I'd painstakingly restored, I realized that the evening had permanently altered my family's dynamics. The careful fiction that had been constructed of Olivia, the impractical dreamer whose contributions were peripheral at best, had been publicly shattered. The Hamilton name now adorned a space that embodied everything I valued professionally, not because of family connection, but because of work I had done independently. The recognition wasn't about family obligation, but earned respect. For the first time in years, I was being seen not as Robert's middle child or Nathan's compliant sister, but as Olivia Hamilton, architect and preservationist in my own right. Dad's cake celebration would continue without me, just as the family photos had. But as I engaged with people who valued my professional vision on its merits, I found myself strangely at peace with that reality. The exclusion that had hurt so deeply hours before now seemed irrelevant compared to the inclusion I was experiencing based on my actual contributions. The locket at my throat no longer felt like a burden of memory, but a source of strength. A connection to the true Hamilton legacy that lived on through my work, regardless of whether my family chose to recognize it. My name on the building wasn't just a professional acknowledgement. It was a reclamation of identity that no family photo could confer or deny. The path forward remained uncertain, the relationship with my family complicated by years of accumulated patterns that couldn't be resolved in a single evening. But as I stood in the space I had restored, surrounded by people who saw value in preservation alongside progress, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The quiet confidence of standing firmly in my own architectural and personal truth, regardless of who chose to stand beside me. The morning after Dad's birthday celebration, I woke in my craftsman bungalow to 17 missed calls, 5 from Nathan, 4 from Abigail, 3 from Dad, and a surprising 5 from Diane. The Hamilton damage control machine was clearly in full operation. I silenced my phone without checking the voicemails and made coffee, taking it out to my small back garden where the morning light filtered through the century-old oak trees. Unlike the sprawling suburban mansions my siblings had chosen, near-identical properties in the same gated community where they could maintain the appropriate Hamilton image, I'd purchased this 1920s craftsman home in the historic district with my portion of Mom's inheritance. The property had been neglected for decades, much like the Oak Ridge East Wing, and I'd spent 3 years meticulously restoring it to its original character while incorporating sustainable systems that reduced its environmental footprint by 70%. Nathan had called it a money pit with wooden dental molding. Dad had seemed bewildered by my choice. Only Mom, during her final months, had truly understood. "You see the bones of things, Olivia," she'd said during her last visit to the property, when it was still mostly gutted. "You always have. That's what makes you a true architect." My tea was still steaming when the distinctive rumble of Nathan's Range Rover disturbed the morning quiet. I'd been expecting this, the direct confrontation after I'd failed to respond to calls. Nathan had never been one for patience when his authority was challenged. He appeared around the side of the house, using the garden gate rather than the front door, a liberty that irritated me but felt sadly typical. He'd always treated my boundaries as optional suggestions. "Couldn't answer your phone?" he asked without preamble, looming over my garden chair in his crisp weekend casual attire. Designer jeans and a polo shirt that probably cost more than most people's formal wear. "Good morning to you too, Nathan," I replied, not offering him coffee or inviting him to sit. I needed some quiet time to process yesterday's events. He made a sound somewhere between a scoff and a sigh. "That's exactly what we need to discuss." "What were you thinking, Olivia? A secret project? A naming ceremony at Dad's birthday? Do you have any idea how blindsided we all were?" The irony of Nathan complaining about being blindsided after years of excluding me from company decisions wasn't lost on me. I took a deliberate sip of my coffee before responding. "I can understand how surprising it must have been," I acknowledged. "Almost as surprising as discovering I'd been classified as extended family at my own father's birthday celebration." Nathan had the decency to look momentarily uncomfortable before rallying. "That was unfortunate phrasing on my part. I apologized for that already in my voicemail." "Did you?" I hadn't listened to any of the messages. "Apology noted then." He paced the small garden path, his energy too big for the intimate space. "Look, what happened with the photos was awkward, I admit that. But this response, this secret project, this public ambush, it was completely disproportionate. Dad is upset, Diane is in tears, and the family business implications are potentially enormous." I set my mug down carefully on the vintage wrought iron table beside me. "What family business implications would those be exactly? I completed a pro bono preservation project independently. How does that impact Hamilton Enterprises?" "Don't be naive, Liv," Nathan said, using the diminutive that had once been affectionate but had gradually transformed into a subtle method of infantilization. "Caroline Winters was at that event. She's been hounding me for months about featuring Hamilton projects in Architectural Quarterly, and I've been carefully cultivating that relationship. Now suddenly she's offering you a cover story for a country club renovation? So that was the real issue, not family harmony or Dad's birthday being hijacked, but Nathan's professional jealousy over Caroline Winters' interest in my work, rather than his. The Oak Ridge project meets her editorial standards," I said simply. "Perhaps if you submitted projects that prioritized design excellence over maximum profit margins, she might show more interest in your portfolio." His face flushed. "That's exactly the kind of impractical thinking that would bankrupt Hamilton Enterprises if you had any actual influence over company direction. Architecture is a business, Olivia, not an artistic indulgence. Dad understood that when he took over from grandfather, and I understand it now." The assertion was so fundamentally flawed that I almost didn't know where to begin. Dad had balanced profit with principles until Mom's death. It was only after, when grief made him withdraw and Nathan stepped into the leadership vacuum, that the company had pivoted so aggressively toward commercial developments with minimal design consideration. Hamilton Enterprises was built on the principle that excellent design and fiscal responsibility aren't mutually exclusive, I reminded him. The company's reputation was established through projects that served communities while generating reasonable returns, not by maximizing profit at the expense of every other consideration. Nathan dismissed this with a wave of his hand. "That was a different era with different market demands. We've tripled revenue in the past 5 years under my approach." While cutting connections to half the client categories grandfather established, I countered. Museums, libraries, community centers, historic renovations, all the projects that built our reputation for excellence rather than just efficiency. He crossed his arms defensively. Those projects had minimal profit potential. I made strategic decisions to focus on our most lucrative market segments. Without consulting me, despite my partnership stake, I pointed out. Or Dad, for that matter, who was still nominally CEO when you began redirecting company resources. Something shifted in Nathan's expression then, a momentary crack in his confident facade that revealed a glimpse of something more complicated. He glanced away, looking at the heritage roses I'd transplanted from Mom's garden rather than meeting my eyes. Dad wasn't in a position to make objective business decisions after Mom died, he said more quietly. Someone had to take control, to prevent the company from drifting. You were wrapped up in your grief, focusing on passion projects instead of core business. Abigail has never had the temperament for leadership. It fell to me to protect what our family had built. There was a nugget of truth buried within his justification. The months after Mom's death had been devastating for all of us, but especially for Dad, who had retreated into a shell of himself. I had indeed sought solace in creative preservation work rather than corporate strategizing. But Nathan had leveraged that difficult period, not just to steady the company, but to fundamentally reshape it in his image, eliminating the aspects that didn't align with his vision while consolidating his authority. I understand stepping up during a family crisis, I said. What I don't understand is systematically dismantling Mom's legacy at the company while pushing me to the periphery of both the business and the family. Nathan's phone chimed with a text message, and he checked it immediately, a habitual response that underscored his constant connection to the business machinery he'd created. Whatever he read caused his expression to tighten further. Dad wants to meet, he said, pocketing the phone. He's called an emergency family discussion at the house for noon. He expects all of us to be there, including you. The presumptive tone, the summary delivery of what was clearly an instruction rather than an invitation, embodied exactly the dynamic I was no longer willing to accept. I have a meeting with the downtown library board at 1, I said. Caroline Winters introduced me to the chairperson last night. Nathan's jaw clenched visibly. The library renovation? That's a Hamilton Enterprises potential project. We've been in preliminary discussions for months. This was news to me. Interesting that as a partner in the firm, I wasn't informed of these discussions. It hadn't reached the stage where broader input was necessary, he replied dismissively. The point is, you can't pursue that independently while still being part of Hamilton Enterprises. It's a conflict of interest. I took another sip of my now cooling coffee, considering my response carefully. I don't recall signing any exclusivity agreement that prevents me from undertaking independent projects, particularly when the company has shown no interest in the type of work I specialize in. That's not how family businesses work, Olivia, and you know it, Nathan said, his frustration evident. There's an understood loyalty, a commitment to the collective good over individual interests. The statement was so hypocritical coming from him that I nearly laughed. Collective good? Is that what you call systematically sidelining me from meaningful projects while redirecting company resources exclusively toward your preferred development types? Or perhaps you mean the kind of loyalty that results in being classified as extended family at my father's birthday? He ran a hand through his meticulously styled hair, a rare gesture of genuine agitation rather than his usual controlled presentation. You're blowing isolated incidents out of proportion to justify actions that could damage the entire family's interests. I completed a successful project that's receiving positive attention from respected industry figures, I countered. The only damage is to your exclusive control of the Hamilton architectural narrative. Nathan checked his watch, an expensive Swiss timepiece that had been Dad's gift to him when he officially became managing partner 3 years ago. No similar ceremony had marked my nominal promotion to sustainability director. This conversation isn't productive, he declared. We can continue at Dad's with everyone present. Noon. He turned to leave, then paused. And Olivia? I'd reconsider meeting with the library board if I were you. Some battles aren't worth the collateral damage. They cause us. The veiled threat hung in the air as he strode back toward the garden gate, his posture rigid with the affronted dignity of someone unaccustomed to having his authority questioned. I remained seated, watching him go, aware that a threshold had been crossed that couldn't be easily retreated from. After he left, I finally checked my voicemails, listening to the cascade of family reactions to last night's revelation. Nathan's message was predictably focused on damage control and discussing next steps as a unified family. Abigail's wavered, between guilt over the photo incident and anxiety about the uncomfortable situation my project had created. Dad's 3 messages grew progressively more directive, culminating in the noon meeting summons Nathan had delivered in person. Most surprising were Diane's 5 increasingly emotional messages. The first was stiffly formal, expressing general regret about yesterday's misunderstandings. By the 5th, her voice had taken on a raw quality I'd never heard before. "Olivia, I know we've never been close," she said, the carefully maintained polish of her public persona noticeably absent. "I've always felt you saw me as an intruder in your family rather than an addition to it. Maybe you were right. But what you did with that building, that's exactly what Robert always said Eleanor would have done. The way you preserved the past, while making it viable for the future. He cried last night after everyone left. Actually cried. He hasn't done that since. Well, since your mother. Please come today. Not for me, or for Nathan's business concerns, but for your father. He needs to really see you, maybe for the first time since Eleanor died." The message left me unsettled, complicating the narrative I'd constructed about Diane as the willing accomplice in my family marginalization. I'd never considered that she might have her own insecurities about entering a family with such a strong matriarchal legacy, or that she might actually value aspects of Mom's approach that Nathan had been so quick to discard. By 11:30, I still hadn't decided whether to attend the family meeting or proceed directly to my 1 o'clock appointment with the library board. The Hamilton family crisis response pattern was deeply familiar. Isolation of the problem, family member, followed by a group intervention where individual concerns were subordinated to collective image management. I'd been through variations of this process repeatedly since childhood, whenever my more contemplative approach had failed to align with the family's action-oriented dynamic. My phone rang again. Martin from Oak Ridge. "Olivia, I hope I'm not interrupting your Sunday," he began. "But Caroline Winters just called the club asking for access to the East Wing for a photo shoot tomorrow morning. She's fast-tracking the Architectural Quarterly feature for next month's issue and wants to send a photographer and interviewer. I told her I'd need to confirm with you first." The opportunity was significant. Architectural Quarterly wasn't just well-respected. It was influential in directing client attention and industry recognition. A cover feature would establish my independent reputation beyond question. It would also definitively challenge Nathan's positioning as the sole architectural authority in the Hamilton family. "Yes, that would be fine," I confirmed. "What time tomorrow?" "They want to start at 7 for the morning light through those east windows you restored," Martin replied. "Caroline specifically mentioned wanting to capture how you preserved the original stained glass while adding the high-efficiency glazing. The technical recognition was deeply satisfying after years of having my expertise dismissed as peripheral. I'll be there at 6:30 to make sure everything's ready," I promised. After ending the call, I made my decision. I would attend the family meeting, but I would also keep my appointment with the library board. It was time to stop adapting my professional path to accommodate Nathan's territorial concerns. If Hamilton Enterprises truly wanted to pursue the library renovation, we could have an open conversation about collaborative approaches rather than defaulting to his unilateral control. The drive to Dad and Diane's house took me from my historic neighborhood through downtown and out to the exclusive lakeside development where they had moved after selling our childhood home 3 years ago. The sleek modern residence had always felt more like a showpiece than a home to me, all glass, steel, and limestone with minimal personal touches. The controlled elegance of the space reflected the new family dynamic that had emerged. polished, impressive, and emotionally restrained. I parked my modest hybrid sedan between Nathan's Range Rover and Abigail's Mercedes in the circular driveway, already feeling the subtle reinforcement of hierarchy that permeated even our vehicle choices. Taking a deep breath, I touched my mother's locket for courage before approaching the imposing front entrance. Diane answered before I could ring the bell, her expression a careful mix of relief and apprehension. "Olivia, thank you for coming," she said, stepping back to let me enter. "Everyone's in the great room." I followed her through the soaring entryway into the open-concept living space that overlooked the lake. Dad stood by the wall of windows, hands clasped behind his back in his characteristic thinking pose. Nathan paced near the fireplace while Abigail and Tyler sat together on one of the minimalist sofas, their postures suggesting discomfort despite the expensive furniture. "Olivia's here," Diane announced unnecessarily, her voice carrying a nervous edge I'd never noticed before. Dad turned, and I was struck by how tired he looked. The usually immaculate Robert Hamilton appeared somehow diminished, with faint shadows under his eyes suggesting a restless night. "Thank you for coming," he said formally, as though addressing a business associate rather than his daughter. "You made it clear it was important," I replied, remaining standing rather than taking a seat. Something about the arranged tableau of family members felt too much like an intervention for me to willingly position myself as the subject of collective concern. Nathan stopped pacing. "We need to discuss yesterday's events and determine how to move forward constructively," he began, automatically assuming the role of meeting facilitator. "The situation with the Oak Ridge renovation has created potential complications for Hamilton, enterprises that need to be addressed." "What Nathan means," Abigail interjected, shooting him a warning glance, "is that we were all surprised by your project, Olivia, and we're trying to understand why you didn't tell any of us about it." The redirection was classic Abigail, softening Nathan's corporate framing with emotional language while still reinforcing the underlying message. As the youngest sibling, she had perfected the role of family diplomat, though her allegiance invariably aligned with whoever held the most power in any given situation, currently Nathan. "I completed a pro bono preservation project in my personal capacity," I stated simply. It wasn't connected to Hamilton Enterprises, so there was no professional obligation to disclose it. "But we're family," Abigail pressed, her expression conveying hurt that might have been genuine or merely performative. With her, it was increasingly difficult to tell. Families share important accomplishments with each other. The observation carried a painful irony given yesterday's events. "Do they? The way you all shared the decision to exclude me from the family photos?" Tyler shifted uncomfortably beside Abigail. Unlike my siblings' spouses, who had been seamlessly absorbed into the Hamilton hierarchy, Tyler had always seemed slightly ill at ease with the family's more ruthless dynamics. "That was unfortunate," he murmured, earning a sharp glance from my sister. "The photo situation was handled poorly," Dad acknowledged, surprising me with the direct admission. "It shouldn't have happened that way." Before I could respond, Nathan redirected the conversation back to his priority. "The immediate concern is Caroline Winter's interest in featuring your project in Architectural Quarterly. Hamilton Enterprises has been cultivating a relationship with her publication for our Westridge development, and this creates a competing narrative that could undermine our positioning. Caroline has been consistently uninterested in Westridge because it's a standard commercial development with minimal design innovation," I pointed out. "Her publication focuses on architectural excellence, not real estate ventures." Nathan's expression hardened. "Westridge is a $90 million mixed-use development that will transform the city's western corridor. It's hardly a generic project." "It's certainly large," I conceded, "but the design is derivative of a dozen similar developments across the country. There's nothing that distinguishes it architecturally or sustainably." "This is exactly the problem," Nathan said, turning to Dad. Olivia's insistence on prioritizing esoteric design elements over market-responsive development has always been out of step with modern business realities. Now she's actively undermining our corporate strategy by pursuing contradictory projects independently. I felt a familiar wave of frustration at having my professional perspective dismissed as impractical idealism. The Oak Ridge renovation has already been featured in 3 industry publications and is being considered for a preservation award, I noted. There's clearly market interest in thoughtful historical adaptation with sustainable elements. Niche. Interest, Nathan countered. Not the scale of clients Hamilton Enterprises targets. The client's grandfather established and mom maintained, I corrected, before you redirected our focus exclusively toward commercial development. Dad raised a hand in a calming gesture that took me back to childhood disagreements. This isn't productive. We need to find a way forward that accommodates both approaches within the Hamilton framework. That's why I called this meeting, Nathan said. I have a proposal that addresses everyone's concerns while maintaining family and business cohesion. He reached for a leather portfolio on the coffee table and withdrew several document folders, passing them around with the practiced efficiency of a corporate executive. I've drafted a framework for integrating Olivia's preservation interests back into Hamilton Enterprises through a specialized division that would operate under her direction, but within our overall corporate structure. I accepted the folder, with skepticism, opening it to find a detailed organizational chart and business plan. The proposed Hamilton Heritage Division would indeed operate under my nominal leadership, but with significant constraints, project approval requirements, budget limitations, and reporting structures that ultimately gave Nathan veto power over any meaningful decisions. This would allow you to pursue projects like Oak Ridge within the Hamilton umbrella, Nathan explained, his tone suggesting he was offering a generous compromise. You'd have creative autonomy within established parameters while benefiting from the company's resources and client network. I closed the folder. And Hamilton Enterprises would benefit from any positive publicity or industry recognition these projects generate, despite having contributed nothing to their development. The Hamilton name contributed, Nathan replied smoothly. Your ability to secure the Oak Ridge project was directly connected to your position as a Hamilton, whether you acknowledge that or not. The assertion carried just enough truth to sting. My family connection had indeed opened the initial door at Oak Ridge, though the board's decision to approve my proposal had been based entirely on its merits. Still, Nathan was wielding a familiar tool, emphasizing family legacy when it served. His interests while dismissing it when it didn't. What about the library renovation? I asked. You mentioned Hamilton Enterprises has been in preliminary discussions about that project. Nathan nodded. Under this new structure, you could lead that project as director of the Heritage Division, with appropriate oversight from the main company leadership. Appropriate oversight meaning your final approval on all significant decisions, I clarified, having scanned the relevant sections of his proposal. That's standard corporate governance, he replied dismissively. The point is, this framework allows you to pursue the projects that interest you while maintaining family business unity. It's a reasonable compromise. I looked toward Dad, who had been watching our exchange with an unreadable expression. What do you think about this proposal? I asked him directly. He seemed momentarily taken aback by the direct question, as though unaccustomed to being asked for his opinion rather than his approval. I believe Nathan has made a good faith effort to accommodate different perspectives within a unified business approach, he said carefully. The Hamilton name has always represented a cohesive family enterprise. Even when that cohesion comes at the expense of half of what Mom valued about architecture? I pressed. Dad flinched slightly at the direct reference to Mom, a reaction I'd seen often enough to recognize but rarely had the courage to challenge. The family's unspoken rule after her death had been to reference her loss only obliquely, never directly connecting her absence to current decisions or directions. Eleanor believed in adaptation, he said after a moment. In finding new paths, forward when circumstances changed. She also believed in standing firmly for core principles, I countered, in not sacrificing foundational values for expedient gains. A heavy silence fell over the room. Abigail looked increasingly uncomfortable, while Tyler studied the elaborate area rug with sudden fascination. Diane, surprisingly, was watching me with an expression that bordered on respect. Nathan broke the tension with practiced efficiency. We're getting sidetracked into philosophical debates when the immediate issue requires practical resolution. Olivia, the proposed heritage division represents a significant concession to your interests. All we're asking is that you bring your work back under the Hamilton umbrella where it belongs. The phrasing was revealing. All we're asking positioned his proposal as a minimal request rather than what it actually was. An attempt to recapture control over work he had previously dismissed as irrelevant. Where it belongs, reinforced, the narrative that my independent success was somehow a betrayal of family loyalty rather than a natural consequence of being systematically marginalized. I appreciate the thought behind this proposal, I said carefully, but I need time to consider it properly. My immediate concern is tomorrow's photo shoot with Architectural Quarterly and my meeting with the library board, which I still intend to keep. Nathan's expression hardened. That meeting should be postponed until we've resolved these internal matters. Having multiple Hamilton representatives approaching the same client creates confusion and undermines our professional credibility. I'm not approaching them as a Hamilton Enterprises representative, I clarified. I'm responding to their interest in my independent work, just as I did with Oak Ridge. There is no independent work when you carry the Hamilton name, Nathan insisted, his voice rising slightly. Every project you touch reflects on the family business, whether you acknowledge that responsibility or not. The assertion crystallized exactly what had been happening for years, the systematic limitation of my professional identity through appeals to family loyalty, while simultaneously excluding me from meaningful participation in the family business. The Hamilton name was being wielded as both chain and currency, binding me to obligations while denying me corresponding influence. That's a remarkably convenient perspective, I observed. The Hamilton name requires my absolute loyalty to business, directions I had no role in determining, while simultaneously justifying my exclusion from family photos because, what? I'm not Hamilton enough when it comes to public representation? Abigail finally spoke up, her discomfort with direct conflict evident in her posture. That photo situation was a misunderstanding, Olivia. Nathan phrased it poorly, but it was about creating different groupings, not excluding you. It was about maintaining the narrative Nathan has been carefully constructing, I corrected. The one where Dad, Diane, you, and Nathan represent the real Hamilton family, while I'm an awkward adjunct who doesn't quite fit the image. That's not fair, Nathan objected. Isn't it? When was the last time I was included in a client presentation? For a major project? Or consulted on strategic direction for the company? Or even invited to family dinners that weren't official celebrations? I looked directly at Dad as I asked the last question, and saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes before he glanced away. Diane surprised everyone by speaking up. She's right, she said quietly. We've been managing Olivia's involvement, rather than welcoming it. I've been part of that too, and I'm sorry. The directness of her admission created a palpable shift in the room's energy. Nathan looked genuinely startled, clearly unaccustomed to having his narrative challenged by his strongest ally after Dad. This isn't productive, he said after an awkward pause. We're here to discuss a specific business matter, not to revisit perceived slights or family dynamics. But they're connected, aren't they? I pressed, feeling a clarity that had been building since the Oak Ridge revelation. The business proposal you're offering is shaped by exactly the same dynamic that led to yesterday's photo incident. expectation that I should be grateful for whatever limited role you're willing to grant me, while surrendering any genuine agency or independent recognition. Dad moved from the window to stand between us, physically embodying the mediator role he'd increasingly adopted in family conflicts. Enough. This isn't resolving anything. He turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Part weariness, part something that might have been regret. Olivia, no one is asking you to surrender anything. The proposal is an attempt to reintegrate your talents into the family business in a way that benefits everyone. After systematically excluding those talents for years, I pointed out. Why the sudden interest in my preservation work now that it's receiving public recognition? Because it's creating a competing narrative, Nathan said bluntly, apparently abandoning the pretense of family harmony. Hamilton Enterprises has one strategic direction. Your independent work presents a contradictory approach under the same family name. It's confusing to clients and damaging to our brand consistency. There it was, the frank acknowledgement that this wasn't about valuing my contributions, but about controlling the Hamilton narrative. Nathan wasn't concerned about excluding valuable architectural approaches from the family business. He was concerned about failing to control approaches that might challenge his authority or vision. So this isn't about reintegrating my talents at all, I said. It's about preventing me from succeeding independently in ways that might question your architectural philosophy. It's about maintaining a coherent family business, Nathan insisted, something you've never seemed to fully appreciate. I looked at the folder containing his proposal, then deliberately set it down on the coffee table. I won't be accepting this offer in its current form, I said with calm certainty. I'm meeting with the library board tomorrow as planned. If they're interested in my approach to historical renovation with sustainable elements, we can discuss terms directly. If Hamilton Enterprises wants to submit a competing proposal based on your design philosophy, that's certainly your right. Nathan's expression darkened. You're deliberately creating a conflict that could damage the entire family's interests. I'm refusing to continue a pattern where my interests are automatically subordinated to yours, I corrected. There's a difference. Dad sighed heavily. Olivia, please reconsider. This division and approach serves no one's interests. I disagree, I replied, surprised by my own steady conviction. It serves the interest of architectural integrity to have multiple approaches represented, rather than a single profit-maximizing philosophy. It serves the client's interest to have genuine options rather than manufactured consensus. And it serves my personal and professional interest to have my work evaluated on its merits, rather than constrained by parameters I had no role in establishing. Nathan's phone chimed with a message, and he checked it reflexively before his expression shifted to one of cold anger. Well, it seems you've been busy on multiple fronts. The Downtown Development Committee just called to ask about competing Hamilton proposals for the Central Plaza redesign. Care to explain how they got that impression? The accusation caught me completely off guard. I haven't had any contact with the Downtown Development Committee, I said honestly. My meeting tomorrow is specifically with the library board about their building renovation. Then why would they be asking about competing proposals from the same family? He pressed, his tone making it clear he didn't believe my denial. A sudden realization dawned on me. Because Caroline Winters is married to James Winters, the development committee chair, I said, remembering a detail from industry publications. She must have mentioned my Oak Ridge work to him. Nathan's expression confirmed my theory. Professional journalists aren't supposed to create conflicts of interest through pillow talk, he said bitterly. They're also supposed to evaluate projects based on architectural merit rather than business relationships, I countered. Something you've never quite accepted. Before Nathan could respond, Dad intervened again. This situation is escalating unnecessarily. We need to present a unified approach to external stakeholders, regardless of internal disagreements. The familiar pattern was asserting itself. family image management taking precedence over substantive resolution. I checked my watch and made a decision. I need to leave for my library board meeting, I said, standing. I'll consider Nathan's proposal and respond with a more detailed assessment tomorrow. In the meantime, I won't be postponing any of my current professional commitments, including the architectural quarterly interview. Olivia, Dad began, but I cut him off gently. I'm not rejecting family connection, Dad. I'm rejecting the assumption that family connection requires surrendering professional integrity or accepting permanent subordination. There's a difference. As I moved toward the door, Nathan made one final attempt. This isn't over, Olivia. The Hamilton name means something in this community, and diluting its impact through competing approaches undermines decades of carefully built influence. I paused, turning back with a clarity that felt both new and deeply familiar, as though I was channeling my mother's voice as well as my own. The Hamilton name has always represented architectural excellence alongside business. Acumen, Nathan. That's the legacy grandfather established and Mom maintained. If anyone has diluted its meaning, it's not the person preserving historical structures with sustainable innovations. It's the one reducing it to a mere profit-generating mechanism. With that, I walked out of the lakeside house that had never felt like home. The weight of the confrontation balanced by the lightness of finally speaking my complete truth. The locket at my throat felt like an anchor connecting me to a Hamilton legacy that transcended Nathan's narrow interpretation. A legacy I was now reclaiming not through family permission, but through independent action aligned with its deepest values. As I drove toward my meeting with the library board, I knew that threshold crossed couldn't be uncrossed. The patterns established over years had been named and challenged, the invisible boundaries made visible through direct confrontation. Whatever came next, professionally or personally, would unfold on fundamentally different terms than before. The downtown library stood at the intersection of the city's historical center and its emerging arts district, a 1930s neoclassical building that embodied exactly the kind of architectural bridge between past and future that had always captivated me. Like many similar structures nationwide, it had suffered from decades of deferred maintenance and haphazard modifications that had compromised both its historical character and functional effectiveness. Caroline Winters was waiting outside when I arrived, her signature silver bob gleaming in the afternoon sun. Olivia, she greeted me with professional warmth. I hope you don't mind my joining your meeting. The board chair invited me to provide context about the architectural quarterly feature. The unexpected alliance was both gratifying and slightly unsettling. Caroline's presence would undoubtedly strengthen my position with the board, but it also represented a deliberate escalation in the professional competition with Nathan. One, he would interpret as a calculated move on my part, rather than the coincidence it actually was. I appreciate the support, I said honestly, though I suspect my brother won't see it that way. A knowing smile crossed her features. Nathan has been aggressively courting coverage for Westridge for months, seemingly under the impression that sufficient persistence would overcome its fundamental lack of architectural distinction. When I mentioned this to James, he was quite interested to learn there was another Hamilton with a dramatically different approach. The candid assessment of Nathan's project stung slightly despite our current conflict. He was still my brother, and family loyalty ran deep despite everything. Westridge has economic development merits, I felt compelled to note. It's just architecturally conventional. Caroline's appraising look suggested she was reassessing. Me? Family loyalty despite professional disagreement. Interesting. She gestured toward the library entrance. Shall we? The board is quite excited after seeing what you accomplished at Oak Ridge. As we climbed the worn limestone steps, I touched my mother's locket once more, a habitual gesture that had become a form of silent communication with her memory. The Hamilton legacy was evolving through me in ways Nathan had never anticipated. When he'd begun systematically limiting my role in the family business, The irony was that his very efforts to constrain my professional expression had ultimately pushed me toward independent work that was now generating exactly the recognition he had long sought for himself. The library board meeting would represent another significant step in this unexpected journey. Not a rejection of my family identity, but a reclamation of its most authentic values through paths Nathan had deemed irrelevant. As Caroline held the massive bronze door open, I stepped through the threshold into a space that embodied both architectural history and future potential, much like the path I was now forging between honoring family legacy and establishing independent identity. The library board meeting exceeded my expectations. 7 members sat around an ornate oak table that had likely been part of the original 1930s furnishings, their expressions ranging from polite interest to genuine enthusiasm as I presented my vision for restoring the building's historical elements while integrating modern sustainability features. "What distinguishes your approach from conventional renovation?" asked Eleanor Reeves, the board chairperson and longtime advocate for preservation in our city. "We've seen proposals that essentially gut the interior while maintaining only the facade." "That approach prioritizes convenience over heritage," I explained, displaying slides from the Oak Ridge project. "I believe in surgical renovation, identifying the essential historical elements that give a space its character and preserving those while strategically modernizing systems and accessibility features." I showed them how we'd maintained the original coffered ceilings at Oak Ridge, while installing state-of-the-art climate control systems within existing structural cavities, preserving appearance while dramatically improving functionality. The before and after images drew appreciative murmurs. "What about costs?" asked Arthur Wilson, the board treasurer whose skeptical expression suggested he expected preservation to carry an unmanageable premium. The Hamilton Enterprise proposal emphasized cost efficiency through standardized construction methods. So Nathan had already submitted a proposal through the company. The revelation wasn't surprising, but the timing suggested he'd accelerated his approach after learning of my interest in the project. Authentic preservation does carry up front costs, I acknowledged, meeting his concern directly. But comprehensive life cycle analysis shows that buildings renovated with quality materials and energy-efficient systems actually cost significantly less over a 30-year period than those relying on standardized, replacement-oriented construction. I displayed the detailed cost projections I'd prepared, showing the intersection point, typically around year 12, where higher initial investment began yielding substantial operational savings. Caroline Winters nodded approvingly from her position near the window. "The Oak Ridge renovation is projected to reduce energy costs by 42% compared to conventional approaches," she added. "That's why we're featuring it in Architectural. Quarterly, it represents the future of sustainable preservation rather than the false economy of disposal culture." The board discussion continued for nearly 2 hours, delving into technical details, timeline projections, and philosophical approaches to balancing historical integrity with modern needs. Throughout the conversation, I felt a sense of professional fulfillment that had been largely absent during my years of marginalization at Hamilton Enterprises. Here, my expertise was being evaluated on its merits, rather than filtered through Nathan's dismissive perspective. As the meeting concluded, Eleanor Reeves walked me to the library's main entrance. "Your vision aligns perfectly with what we've been seeking," she said. "A building that honors its past while serving contemporary needs." "That balance has always been central to my approach," I replied. "Historical structures contain embodied wisdom about materials, proportions, and relationship, to environment that modern construction often overlooks in favor of standardization." She smiled knowingly. "Your brother made a compelling financial case in the Hamilton Enterprises proposal, but there was something fundamentally missing. The soul of the building was absent from his considerations." The observation was precisely what Mom would have said. Nathan had always been brilliant with numbers and logistics, but approached buildings as financial assets rather than cultural repositories or human experiences. It was why Caroline Winters consistently declined to feature his projects despite their technical proficiency. "We'll be making our decision next week," Eleanor continued, "but I wanted you to know personally that your presentation today reminded many of us why we joined this board in the first place: to protect and enhance the architectural heritage that gives our city its distinctive character." As I descended the limestone steps back into the afternoon sunlight, Caroline Winters fell into step beside me. "That went exceptionally well," she observed. "Your technical expertise is matched by genuine passion for the work. It's a compelling combination." "Thank you," I said, suddenly conscious of receiving professional validation from someone whose opinion genuinely mattered in our field. "That means a great deal coming from you." She glanced at me appraisingly. "Your brother called me 4 times this morning, attempting to dissuade me from featuring the Oak Ridge project. He suggested it represented a hobby effort rather than serious architectural work." The dismissal stung despite being entirely predictable. "Nathan has always categorized my preservation interests that way," I acknowledged. "It's easier than engaging with approaches that challenge his development philosophy." "Well, his perspective hasn't aged well," Caroline replied briskly. "While he's been building disposable commercial spaces, the industry has been shifting toward exactly the sustainable preservation model you've implemented. Next month's cover story will make that abundantly clear." As she walked toward her car, she turned back with a parting observation. "Family business dynamics can be brutally complex, Olivia. But remember that architectural legacy isn't determined by internal politics. It's established through the structures we leave behind and their impact on human experience. Based on what I saw at Oak Ridge, your vision will long outlast current disagreements." The validation carried me through the evening as I prepared for the following morning's architectural quarterly photo shoot. I arrived at Oak Ridge at 6:15, before even the early maintenance staff, using my key to access the east wing while dawnlight was just beginning to illuminate the restored stained glass features. I walked through the space alone, remembering the countless hours I'd spent problem-solving complex preservation challenges, the rotted support beams that needed reinforcement without disturbing the decorative plasterwork, the outdated electrical systems embedded in walls with irreplaceable murals, the balance between historical accuracy and contemporary safety standards. Each solution had required creative thinking unconstrained by conventional approaches, exactly the kind of architectural problem-solving that had made Hamilton Enterprises respected before Nathan narrowed its focus to standardized commercial development. This project embodied the legacy my grandfather had established, and my mother had maintained. A legacy I was now advancing independently, since the family firm had abandoned it. Caroline arrived with her photography team just before 7, her professional efficiency evident in how quickly they began capturing the space from angles that highlighted both historical elements and modern interventions. The interviewer, a thoughtful architectural historian named Marcus Chen, asked insightful questions about my design philosophy and technical approaches. "This space tells such a coherent story," he observed as we discussed the library renovation that had preserved original reading nooks while integrating subtle accessibility features. "Each historical element has been respected while ensuring contemporary functionality. It's rare to see such seamless integration." "That's the fundamental challenge of meaningful preservation," I explained. "Finding the balanced point where history and future meet without compromising either. It requires case-by-case assessment rather than standardized solutions." "Which is precisely what makes it difficult to scale commercially," noted a familiar voice from the doorway. I turned to find Nathan standing there, impeccably dressed in one of his business suits despite the early hour. His unexpected presence created an immediate tension in the room, with Caroline's photographer pausing mid-shot. "Nathan," I acknowledged, maintaining professional composure despite my surprise. "I wasn't expecting you this morning." "Clearly," he replied, his gaze taking in the photography equipment and interview setup with poorly concealed disapproval. I thought we should continue yesterday's conversation before this article creates further confusion about Hamilton architectural approaches. Caroline stepped forward, every inch the formidable editor-in-chief. Mr. Hamilton, we're in the middle of a scheduled photo session and interview. Perhaps you could arrange a separate time to speak with your sister. Nathan's smile didn't reach his eyes. Actually, as managing partner of Hamilton Enterprises, I'd be happy to provide additional context about our firm's overall design philosophy and how various project types fit within our comprehensive approach. The strategic move was classic Nathan, attempting to reframe my independent work as merely a specialized subset of the company's broader vision, thereby recapturing control of the narrative. Caroline, however, wasn't easily manipulated. This feature specifically focuses on Olivia Hamilton's preservation work at Oak Ridge, she said firmly. We've already completed separate coverage of Hamilton Enterprises' commercial development portfolio in our March issue. I remembered the article, a small sidebar in the industry trends section, rather than the feature coverage Nathan had been pursuing. His expression confirmed the sting of the reminder. Architectural excellence isn't limited to preservation projects, he countered smoothly. Hamilton Enterprises has pioneered integrated commercial developments that balance economic vitality with community needs. An important approach, certainly, Caroline acknowledged with professional diplomacy. But today's focus is specifically on this renovation and Ms. Hamilton's distinctive preservation methodology. Nathan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a tell I recognized from childhood when he encountered immovable opposition. He turned to me with forced casualness. Perhaps we could speak privately for a moment? Part of me wanted to refuse outright, to maintain the professional boundary the photo shoot established, but deeper wisdom prevailed. Avoiding the conversation would only escalate tensions further. We can use the conference room, I suggested, leading him toward a smaller space adjacent to the main hall. As soon as the door closed behind us, Nathan's carefully maintained facade cracked. What exactly do you think you're doing, Olivia? We had a family meeting yesterday to discuss a unified approach, and now I find you proceeding with a feature article that directly undermines our corporate positioning. The photo shoot was scheduled before yesterday's meeting, I reminded him, and I was clear about my intention to maintain my professional commitments. This isn't just about professional commitments, he said, lowering his voice though his intensity remained palpable. This is about deliberately establishing a competing architectural identity under the Hamilton name. The accusation contained a fundamental truth I couldn't deny. My independent work did represent a different interpretation of architectural values than Nathan's commercial focus, one more aligned with our family's original principles. I'm not competing with Hamilton Enterprises, I said carefully. I'm pursuing project types the company has explicitly abandoned under your direction. If anyone changed our architectural identity, it was you when you eliminated preservation and community-focused work from our portfolio. He ran a hand through his meticulously styled hair, a rare gesture of genuine agitation. The market changed, Olivia. We adapted to remain competitive. That's business reality, not some betrayal of principles you seem to imagine. The market diversified, I corrected. While demand for commercial development continued, interest in sustainable preservation grew simultaneously. You chose to focus exclusively on one segment while dismissing the other as impractical idealism. Nathan paced the small conference room, his controlled movements betraying deep frustration. This divide isn't sustainable. Dad is deeply concerned about the family business fracturing publicly. The invocation of Dad's concern was a familiar tactic, using parental authority to reinforce Nathan's position without actually addressing the substantive issues. Did Dad send you here this morning? I asked directly. His momentary hesitation answered before his words could. I made an executive decision to address this situation before it escalates further. So this is your initiative, not a family consensus, I noted. Just like most decisions regarding my role in the company have been your unilateral determinations rather than collaborative discussions. Nathan stopped pacing, fixing me with the intense gaze that had intimidated countless business opponents. I've spent 15 years building Hamilton Enterprises into a regional powerhouse, while you've been exploring your architectural interests. The company's success validates my approach. Financial success isn't the only measure of architectural legacy, I replied, voicing the perspective Mom had championed throughout her career. Our grandfather established Hamilton Enterprises to create spaces that enriched communities while generating sustainable returns, not to maximize profit at the expense of every other consideration. That romantic vision isn't viable in today's competitive environment, Nathan insisted. I gestured toward the main hall where Caroline and her team were documenting my successful project. The cover of Architectural Quarterly suggests otherwise, as does the library board's enthusiasm for preservation-centered approaches. Something shifted in Nathan's expression then, a flicker of recognition that perhaps his dismissal of my architectural philosophy had been premature. The moment of potential breakthrough was interrupted by a knock at the door. Marcus Chen, the interviewer, poked his head in apologetically. Sorry to interrupt, but Caroline wanted me to let you know we need to complete the main hall photography while the morning light is optimal. Nathan stepped back, his professional mask sliding back into place. Of course. My sister will rejoin you momentarily. After Marcus withdrew, Nathan turned back to me with unexpected directness. This isn't finished, Olivia. The Hamilton legacy can't sustain contradictory architectural visions indefinitely. Something will have to give. The statement wasn't delivered as a threat, but as a prediction, one that carried the weight of genuine conviction rather than mere posturing. For perhaps the first time, I glimpsed the real concern beneath Nathan's controlling behavior. A fear that divided focus would ultimately weaken the family legacy he'd dedicated his life to advancing, albeit through a narrowed interpretation of its values. You're right that something will have to give, I acknowledged. But perhaps what needs to change isn't the existence of multiple architectural approaches under the Hamilton name, but the assumption that diversity of perspective weakens rather than strengthens our collective legacy. I returned to the photo session with a complicated mixture of emotions. Frustration at Nathan's continued attempts to control the narrative, but also a new understanding of the genuine conviction driving his actions. The family dynamics that had seemed so clearly adversarial were perhaps more complex than I'd acknowledged, shaped by different interpretations of responsibility toward shared heritage rather than simple power struggles. As Caroline's team captured the East Wing from every angle, I found myself reflecting on the larger pattern our family embodied. The tension between preservation and progress, between honoring foundations and building new structures, between individual expression and collective identity. These weren't merely architectural questions, but fundamental human challenges playing out through our professional and personal interactions. The photo shoot concluded around noon, with Caroline expressing complete satisfaction with both the visual documentation and interview content. This will be our most substantive preservation feature in years, she noted as her team packed equipment. Your technical innovation within historical frameworks represents exactly the direction thoughtful architecture is moving. As I walked her team out, I was surprised to find Dad's car pulling into the parking area. The classic Jaguar he reserved for significant occasions rather than everyday transportation. He emerged looking unusually uncertain, his normally commanding presence softened by what appeared to be genuine discomfort. Olivia. He greeted me with formal distance. I hoped to catch you before you left. Do you have a moment to talk? Caroline raised an eyebrow slightly before tactfully excusing herself. We have everything we need. The feature will be finalized next week, and we'll send advance copies before publication. Once her team departed, Dad and I stood awkwardly. In the morning sunshine, the generational gap between us suddenly feeling both vast and artificial simultaneously. "Nathan mentioned he saw you this morning," he finally said. He seemed concerned about the direction of things. "I imagine he is," I acknowledged. "The photo shoot went well. The article will be substantive." Dad nodded, glancing toward the East Wing entrance where my name now appeared on the dedication plaque. "I drove past 3 times yesterday before I finally parked. Just sat in the car looking at your name on that building." The admission surprised me with its vulnerability, so unlike the composed business leader who had dominated my childhood. "What were you thinking about?" I asked gently. He seemed to consider the question carefully before answering. "About your mother, mostly. About how she would have approached the unveiling moment, with quiet pride rather than public drama, letting the work speak for itself rather than demanding recognition." His gaze met mine directly. "Very much as you did, actually." The comparison to Mom created a sudden tightness in my throat. "I learned from her example," I managed to say. "Yes," he agreed softly. "More than I realized until I saw that building, with your name on it. It was like seeing Eleanor's architectural values continuing through you while I wasn't paying attention." We walked slowly toward the entrance, Dad observing details of the restoration with the trained eye of someone who had spent decades in architecture before corporate management became his primary focus. "The integration of modern systems within historical frameworks is remarkably elegant," he noted, examining how we'd incorporated energy-efficient lighting into original fixtures. "This balances preservation and progress more effectively than I would have thought possible." The professional assessment meant more than any emotional reconciliation could have, a recognition of architectural merit from the man whose approval I'd sought throughout my career. "That balance was always the challenge," I replied. "Finding the point where historical integrity and contemporary function could coexist without compromising either." Dad nodded thoughtfully. "Nathan sees architectural problems through economic parameters, identifying the most efficient path to market-responsive solutions. Valid in many contexts, but insufficient for projects like this where cultural heritage creates value beyond financial metrics." The nuanced assessment surprised me, acknowledging Nathan's strengths while recognizing his limitations. It was perhaps the most balanced perspective I'd heard from Dad since Mom's death, had pushed him toward increasingly binary thinking. "Why did you come here today?" I asked directly as we completed our circuit of the main hall. Dad paused near the original fireplace I'd painstakingly restored, his expression reflecting complicated emotions. "Because I realized something after you left yesterday. When I look at what you've created here, this thoughtful balance between heritage and innovation, I see the true continuation of what Eleanor and I built together before everything changed." He touched the mantelpiece with architect's appreciation for the craftsmanship. "Nathan has built something impressive with Hamilton Enterprises, but he's done it by narrowing our vision to what's most efficiently profitable. You've maintained the broader perspective that made our work meaningful beyond financial returns." The acknowledgement created a complex wave of emotions, validation of principles I'd maintained despite systematic dismissal, relief at being truly seen by my father, and sadness for the years of connection lost to grief and communication failures. "I don't want to choose between my children's architectural visions," Dad continued with unexpected directness. "But I also can't pretend they're reconcilable under a single corporate structure. Nathan will never incorporate preservation values. He considers economically inefficient, and you shouldn't compromise principles you've proven are both environmentally and culturally essential." He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope bearing the Hamilton Enterprises letterhead. "This is a different proposal than Nathan's, one I've been considering since seeing your name on this building." I accepted it cautiously, opening it to find legal documentation establishing a new entity, Hamilton Preservation Partners, with my name listed as founding principal and majority shareholder. The structure included substantial initial capitalization and formal separation from Hamilton Enterprises while maintaining connection to the broader family legacy. You would have complete creative and operational independence, Dad explained, while benefiting from the Hamilton name and certain shared resources. Nathan would continue leading Hamilton Enterprises along his established commercial path. Two complementary expressions of architectural values under the family umbrella, rather than competing visions within a single structure. The proposal represented something I hadn't dared hope for. Not just professional validation, but institutional support for an approach Nathan had systematically marginalized. More significantly, it represented Dad's first decisive action to balance family dynamics, since Mom's death had left him increasingly deferential to Nathan's assertive leadership. "What does Nathan think of this proposal?" I asked, already anticipating his reaction. Dad's slight grimace confirmed my suspicion. "He doesn't know about it yet. This isn't a unilateral decision. You both need to consider whether this approach serves your professional interests. But as the senior Hamilton architect and majority owner of the parent company, I believe it represents our best path forward." The transformation was remarkable, from the passive father who had allowed Nathan to gradually redefine family boundaries to an active patriarch reasserting balanced leadership. Something about seeing my name on the Oak Ridge building had apparently catalyzed a reconsideration of patterns that had developed almost unconsciously over years. "I'll consider it carefully," I promised, genuinely moved by both the proposal and the shift it represented in our family dynamic. Dad nodded, seemingly satisfied with this response. As we walked back toward the parking area, he paused, looking back at the building that now bore my name. "Your mother would have loved what you've done here," he said quietly. "The way you've honored the past while creating space for the future. It's what she always tried to teach both you and Nathan, though he absorbed different lessons." He hesitated, then added with unexpected emotional openness, "And she would have been first in line to ensure you were in those family photos, Olivia. That mistake won't happen again." As he drove away in his classic Jaguar, I remained standing. In the morning sunshine, the weight of the proposal in my hands balanced by the lightness in my heart. The path forward remained uncertain. Nathan's resistance would be substantial, and years of established patterns couldn't be reversed through a single conversation or legal document. But something fundamental had shifted. The exclusion that had prompted my stand at Dad's birthday had led not to deeper estrangement, but to genuine recognition, not just of my professional contributions, but of my essential place in both family and legacy. The name on the building had made visible what had been systematically overlooked, creating space for reconsideration and potential reconciliation. I touched my mother's locket, drawing strength from her memory as I had throughout this journey. The emerald stone at its center caught the morning light, throwing green reflections that reminded me of her eyes. Always seeing potential where others saw only limitations, always finding balance between opposing forces. Whatever came next, professionally and personally, would unfold on fundamentally different terms than before. The invisible boundaries that had constrained me had been made visible through confrontation, then transcended through creative reimagining, rather than mere resistance. Not a rejection of family connection, but a redefinition of how that connection could accommodate authentic difference, rather than demanding uniform conformity. As I walked back toward the east wing that now bore my name, I felt a sense of coming home to myself, to the architect I had always been beneath the accommodation, to the daughter who carried forward not just a name, but a philosophy, to the sister who could perhaps build bridges with Nathan not through capitulation, but through confident coexistence. The Hamilton legacy wasn't a fixed structure, but an evolving creation, one I was now actively shaping rather than passively receiving. The building with my name represented not just professional accomplishment but personal reclamation. the visible manifestation of boundaries established and maintained, of identity honored rather than erased, of light no longer dimmed but allowed, to illuminate spaces long kept in shadow. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.